There's a humanitarian crisis that we need to talk about, ladies and gentlemen. And it's not one of the humanitarian crises that you may be thinking of. It's not the Hawaii wildfire. It's not the wide open southern border and all the sex trafficking and human smuggling that accompany it. It's not the pandemic levels of homelessness and drug addiction and violent crime in our big cities. It's not even the fact that our average national lifespan is now going down because so many people are killing themselves. No. It's something much more serious and sobering than all that. In fact, Jim Eagle, I want you to play some maudlin piano music in the background, just like they do on the fake news. When they want the viewers to know they should be very, very emotionally invested in whatever nonsense it is they're peddling on that particular day. You know, the kind of music that you only ever used to hear on those Sally Struthers Feed the Children commercials. But it's now a regular feature of every evening national news broadcast. You know, vaguely depressing, but with sort of a slightly hopeful edge to it. Oh, there we go. I like that. Well done. He's not the best producer in the business for nothing, folks. I feel like we need some candles and some incense smoke to set the scene properly, but the hell with that. The maudlin piano music is just fine on its own. And I hear you asking, what humanitarian crisis could be so severe that it requires such absurd aesthetic accoutrements? Well, please allow me to tug your heartstrings. Now, if you've been on the internet for longer than 5 minutes, you're probably already familiar with Rule 34, which states that if a thing exists, there is porn of it. But far fewer people are familiar with Rule 35, which also is a universal truth. Rule 35 says, anytime there is any sort of technological innovation, it will be exploited first and most effectively by pornographers. We have also talked at some length in recent weeks about my firm belief that within the next 10 years, movies starring computer simulations of long-dead actors will be more popular at the box office than movies starring actors who are currently alive. Well, that tidal wave is already starting to crash down on our cultural coastline, and wouldn't you know it, it is hitting the world of internet porn first and hardest. No pun intended. And it's already causing widespread devastation in one of our most vulnerable communities, cam whores. Or if you prefer a less offensive term, girls who sell pictures of their buttholes online to make a living. Or to support their meth habit. Take your pick, I guess. It seems the digital AI revolution is already striking the internet cam whore community like a thunderclap of despair, with vast numbers of cam whore fans, also known as young men without enough social skills and self-confidence to go get themselves laid like real men, abandoning living, breathing human cam whores in favor of computer-generated AI cam whores, since I guess the technology has now progressed to the point where many of these pitiful idiot loser douchebags have developed a preference for buying pictures of cartoon buttholes instead of actual human buttholes. So if you're one of those clueless, oblivious parents who can't figure out how your 22-year-old daughter manages to pull down an income without ever leaving her bedroom, and you notice she's got less spending cash than normal, it may well be that she has been hawking pictures of her vajayjay to strange men online, and business is suddenly not as good as it usually is. Oh, you thought she was just making YouTube videos in there? Yeah. Sorry about that. She's actually been spreading her lady garden for every stranger on the interwebs who's willing to toss some spare change in her direction. Just don't call it prostitution, because AOC will get very mad. Because sex work is sex work, she says, and she is very passionate about that point, for some reason. Now, I can't say whether there is something in her background or life experience that makes her so passionate about it. And obviously, I would never cast aspersions upon the moral character of a duly elected member of Congress, but suffice it to say, she is very adamant about the fact that selling pictures of your cooter to strangers on the interwebs is a real and honorable vocation that any young woman would be proud to aspire to. I mean, who the hell wants to be a doctor or a lawyer or a nuclear physicist when you can be just as successful peddling pictures of your twat to random perverts? The student loans are a hell of a lot easier to pay off, that's for damn sure. Now, it was only yesterday that I became aware of this newest scourge upon our society. Where even purveyors of pink taco portraits are being replaced by machines and having their livelihoods threatened, so I got to thinking. I've got myself a bit of a platform now, a bit of public exposure, though of a decidedly different sort. So, what can I do to help ameliorate this latest threat to hard-working Americans who ask nothing more than a level playing field on which to ply their trade, a fair opportunity to make their way in the world in a free and open marketplace of pussy pics, unencumbered by cartoon competition? So, I channeled my inner Bob Geldof, and I decided I should put together a benefit concert, which I am proud to announce right here and now. We are still kicking around ideas for the name, but the best suggestion we have so far is Captain Curmudgeon's Mega Maga Meat Curtain Concert for the Cure. Now, I can't give away the names of any artists who will be appearing, but suffice it to say we have secured some of the very biggest names in the industry, and they all really, really like vaginas. So, no Elton John. Sorry. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we use more slang terms for female genitalia in one opening segment than most people do all day. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. So Trump's gotten indicted again, as you may have heard. But is that really even a newsworthy thing anymore? I think Trump's been indicted more times at this point than Demi Lovato has publicly changed her sexual orientation, which is to say, it's a big number that's rather difficult to keep track of. But there's a strange thing that happens within the conservative commentariat, and it happens each time some partisan hack district attorney indicts Trump for some made-up bullshit nonsense. Each time there's one of these fake indictments, all the commentators on the right point out, correctly, that, hey, this indictment happened within 24 hours of some really damning bit of news about the criminal activities of the Biden family. So this is obviously, transparently, brazenly an attempt to distract everyone's attention from the biggest corruption scandal in the history of the presidency. And then, as if they didn't hear the words that just came out of their own face hole, they spend the next 2 or 3 days talking about nothing else but the stupid Trump indictment. So, Bueller? This strikes me as being the intellectual equivalent of stepping on a rake that you just deliberately placed in your own path. Like, hey, look at that rake I just placed on the ground. How about if I step on it? Would you look at that? That rake hit me in the face that I just placed on the ground and then stepped on. How the hell does that happen? I believe that is what the youngsters call a self-own. So you correctly surmised that the fake Trump indictment is an obvious and cynical attempt to obfuscate and distract from the actual real-world corruption of the scumbag president and his reprobate family, and then you gave the authors of the obfuscation the exact thing they wanted from you. So well done. Very well done indeed. Golf clap for you, conservative commentariat. With friends like you all, who the hell needs enemies? Because look, there's not really anything you can say about fake indictment number 4 that you didn't already say, correctly, about fake indictments 1 through 3. It is a ham-handed attempt to rig the presidential election in favor of the Democrats, because of course it is. Were the charges brought by a partisan political hack of a DA whose antics are impossible for any sane person to take seriously? Yes, of course they were. Would these charges have ever been filed in a million years against any person not named Donald Trump? No, of course they wouldn't. So why pivot away from the biggest corruption scandal in presidential history to talk about this crap for days and weeks on end when that is exactly what they want you to do? Is it that difficult to keep your eye on the damn ball? But I do have a couple of quick questions about this idiot DA in Fulton County, Georgia, which I haven't heard anybody else ask, so I guess, regrettably, the task falls to me. Question number 1. How seriously am I supposed to take a district attorney whose name is Fanny? Question number 2. How seriously am I supposed to take a district attorney who runs for office on a platform of, I want to advance equity and racial justice, and also I will get Trump? Because I always thought a district attorney's first and really only job was supposed to be aggressively pursuing a conviction in every winnable case that gets referred to their office. Question number 3. How seriously am I supposed to take a district attorney who wants to imprison a former president for having the wrong thoughts in his head when that same district attorney has declined to prosecute fully 40% of the felony cases referred to her office? This chick has been very clear about the fact that she hates Donald Trump with the white-hot intensity of 1,000 supernovae. But if I was a resident of Fulton County, I think I would rather she direct some tiny fraction of that hatred towards, say, murderers, rapists, armed robbers, car thieves, child molesters. But I guess they aren't the real criminals. The real criminal is the guy who thought a thing that maybe wasn't true, allegedly. That's the guy who should spend the rest of his natural-born life behind bars. And look, if that's the standard of equal justice being applied by the person in charge of criminal prosecutions in your county is probably doomed. Meanwhile, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. is still the most corrupt politician of at least the last 100 years and the most corrupt president in history, bar none. It used to be that we had a system of societal checks and balances to where a man who was this obviously comically corrupt wouldn't be able to even sniff his party's nomination, much less actually win the presidency. And I go back again to the first of Joe Biden's many, many failed campaigns for president back in 1988. Actually, that's not entirely right, because his 1988 campaign never made it out of 1987. He had to drop out of the race in shame and embarrassment when the press found out he had been going around giving a stump speech that was 100% plagiarized. Like, word for word. He didn't even change anything around. He just hit copy and paste and figured nobody would ever know. Which is sort of the same way he runs his criminal enterprises. But the point being, in 1987, candidate Joe Biden did a corrupt, dishonest thing. And when the news media found out about it, they reported it. And the guy dropped out of the race within 48 hours. That is the way these things are supposed to work. The function of the news media in a presidential campaign used to be and is supposed to be holding all the candidates of all the parties to account when they behave in a corrupt and or dishonest and or sleazy fashion. And Joe Biden wasn't the only Democrat candidate who had to drop out of the race in 1987, due to his sleazy behavior being uncovered and reported on by the press. You may remember the name Gary Hart, senator from Colorado. He was supposed to be the Democrat nominee that year. He had finished a strong second to Walter Mondale in 84, and going into 88, he was considered something close to a shoo-in. Everybody else in the race, your mediocre goofballs like Joe Biden and Mike Dukakis, they were all basically running for the honor of being Gary Hart's running mate. Just like this year's cast of non-Trump Republicans are doing. Except for Chris Christie. That buffoon would say literally anything to get his bloated-ass face on CNN for 2 or 3 minutes. And speaking of that, dude, if you're trying to ingratiate yourself to conservative voters by doing appearances on freaking CNN, you need to fire your idiot campaign manager because you are doing it wrong. But in 1988, in the event, Gary Hart's campaign also didn't make it out of 1987, just like Joe Biden's didn't. Why? Because he got busted cheating on his wife. The press got a hold of some pictures of a young, bubbly Donna Rice clad in nothing but an oversized t-shirt, sitting on a very happy Gary Hart's lap in a fishing boat somewhere. And what did they do with said pictures? Well, they put them on the front page of every newspaper in the goddamn country. And within 2 or 3 days, Gary Hart, the presumptive nominee, the guy who was supposed to win the race going away, he dropped out in disgrace. And then got voted out of the Senate the next time he came up for re-election, and then pretty much fell off the face of the earth. So the nomination winds up going to Mike Dukakis, of all people. And one Willie Horton and one ill-advised photo op in a tank later, he gets crushed by George H.W. Bush and winds up as little more than a punchline in American political history. For people who are too young to remember all that, but I think nobody that young watches this channel anyway, so possibly it's a moot point, you may be shocked to learn that as recently as 35 years ago, 2 Democrat senators were forced to drop out of the same race because the news media uncovered and reported on their malfeasance and bad behavior. Now contrast that with the behavior of the current-day fake news media that did absolutely everything within their power to make sure that same Joe Biden they forced out of the race in 87 got duly installed in the White House in 2020. If they had abided by anything like the same set of standards they applied to Democrat candidates in the 1988 race? Would Joe Biden be the president today? No, he would not. Would he have even been the Democrat nominee in 2020? No, he would not have. Would his campaign have even survived 2019? No, it would not have. Because that set of checks and balances we used to have, where people in the news business were willing to report on corruption and bad behavior by Democrats and Republicans alike, it doesn't exist anymore. Nowadays, the media decide who they want the president to be, and then they slavishly prop up that person and set out to utterly destroy every candidate who is not that person. And so, in 2020, for lack of any less terrible option, that person wound up being the withered, emaciated husk of Joe Biden. Did the media know all along that he and his degenerate, stripper-impregnating crackhead son had been using Eastern Europe as a Biden family cash machine throughout Barack Obama's second term? Of course they did. Did they know every single thing in Hunter's laptop? Of course they did. Did they know they were willing participants in a scheme to rig the 2020 election in favor of their preferred winner, just as they had done in 2016? Of course they did. All they had to do this time was get the big tech oligarchs in the tank in order to accomplish for Joe what they failed to accomplish for Hillary. You see, in 2016, there was just too much free and open discourse on the internet. We can't let that happen again. So any news story that might damage Joe's candidacy has to be suppressed with extreme prejudice. Anybody who advocates too effectively on behalf of Donald Trump has to be silenced and deplatformed. And when Joe leaves the basement for 7 minutes each morning and shuffles out to the front yard, we have to only ask him the most ridiculous softball marshmallow questions about how awful the bad orange president is. So what's the bottom line? Well, let's put it in the starkest terms possible. Any newspaper or TV channel that existed prior to this century cannot be trusted as a reliable source of information on anything. They have forfeited many times over any ethical credibility or right to the public trust that they once enjoyed. And things have only gotten worse and will continue to do since all these legacy news outlets became basically barnacles on the hull of the SS Big Tech, because very few people consume the content those outlets produce by reading an actual newspaper or watching an actual television broadcast. The cable news networks get way, way, way more viewership on Twitter and Facebook than they do from people watching their televisions. Or, in the case of CNN, from homeless junkies watching in empty bus terminals. And the same is true, of course, of newspapers. And the reality is, when you're making a product that is primarily consumed online, any desire you once had to do honest, ethical journalism has to be subsumed by the dicks for clicks internet model, which is exactly why there is no longer any difference at all between the mainstream media and what we used to call the tabloid media. If I compared CNN unfavorably with the National Enquirer, the Enquirer would be perfectly within their rights to sue me for libel and defamation, because CNN is orders of magnitude more absurd and more dishonest than the Enquirer was ever on its worst day, even when they were reporting Elvis sightings in 1995. Journalism still exists, and there are still good reporters out there who are doing valuable and necessary work. You just have to do a bit of work to find it now. And if you're asking me what my solution is for fixing it all, my simple answer is, and it's an answer you have heard from me many times before, if both major parties and every legacy media outlet ceased to exist tomorrow, the benefits to the society would be immeasurable. Imagine a world where candidates had to run on their own merits and didn't need to satisfy some institutional party machine apparatus, and where all the news reporting was done by citizen journalists who care about journalism, instead of fake news performance artists who are little more than party apparatchiks trying to maintain their position as members of the wealthy, privileged elite. Just imagine, it's easy if you try. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn!